Brandon, Scoop B, Robinson. What's up, man? Where you at? New York, Minnesota? Where you at?
I'm somewhere in the 50 states.
That's all that matters. Steph Marbury was talking about how it's cold in Minnesota. Was it cold out there, man?
It is cold out there. You know, it's funny. I have a funny Stephon story. Last season, I went to Minnesota for the first time, and I text Stephon and I said, and I don't think he'll mind me telling the story because it's all different. But I text him and I told him, "Yo, I'm going to Minnesota. What should I look out for?" He goes, "You should be looking out for your ass because it's gonna be cold." And when I got to Minnesota, it was -4 degrees. And I texted him and I said, "Yo, you wasn't lying." He said, "I told you." But man, I had a wonderful time in Minnesota. You got the indoor passageways, kind of like Toronto, where you can instead of going outside, you can walk through buildings that underground to take you to where it needs to be, where you need to be. The indoor pool was cool. The hot tub at the hotel I was at, it was dope. Like I went to see Prince's house. There were definitely some amazing things that I saw the first time I went out that way. And the restaurant that I check out called Fahima's, they have their food. A lot of the players go there, even the visiting team, they go there after. But Stephon definitely set me straight. Make sure you cover your ass when you get out there because it's a different type of cold. It's so crazy. When I went to Boston and then I flew to Minnesota. I was in Minnesota for a few days and then flew right to Chicago, and it felt like summer in comparison, the weather, and it was still winter to the Minnesota frigid that it was. So Minnesota is definitely on the cold side of an acquired taste, but definitely a lot of good people in the area that I've gotten to know and build strong bonds with over the last season or so.
Speaking of Minnesota, they're giving the Denver Nuggets major problems. It's interesting because I heard you talk about how this playoffs or the NBA in general feels more like March Madness because the title's up for grabs. I know a lot of people like thought it was Denver all the way. Yours truly thought it was Denver all the way, but I mean, are we seeing Denver fold before our eyes?
I don't like to go with that storyline yet because it takes 4 games to win before you go to the next round. But with Minnesota currently up 2-0, those storylines are naturally going to be a thing. But I'll be honest with you, I do stand by what I said, where I feel like um, it is like March Madness. You really don't know who's going to be there. But um, what's interesting about Minnesota specifically is that they took game two without Gobert defensively. But I think that they just adjusted with the behemoth that is Karl Anthony Towns mixed with the NBA Six Man of the Year and Nas Reed, and that's just in the interior. But when you talk about Anthony Edwards and what he's done, Mike Conley Jr., what he's done in any iteration of Shlomo, as well as Monte Morris and Mike Conley Jr. I think that they are a cohesive unit that's really been gelling and building over the last couple of years. And so I'm happy to see them do what they need to do. But the third eye does ask this question, and I've had these conversations with some of my colleagues. When you look back at the Denver Nuggets, okay, say they don't make the finals this year, is this a situation where you look at the Nuggets to how you look at the Bucks from a few years ago?
Yeah.
They got that one championship, and then you look at the Toronto Raptors where they got their championship in 2019, and some may argue about the Houston Rockets. Maybe not in '95 because Jordan had returned from playing baseball, and I don't want to sell them short. And I have some friends that are on that team, so I don't want to be disrespectful. But the '94 championship, you definitely wonder. They played against the Knicks and did win handily. But when you go back and you look at teams like the Raptors, teams like the Bucks, will Denver fit that mold, or will they continue to win championships if they don't compete this year? That's just something that I've thought about at least. But right now, you want to give Minnesota their just due. They're up 2-0 in the series, and Anthony Edwards has been playing MVP caliber basketball nonetheless.
Speaking of Anthony Edwards, we're hearing the MJ comps, Scoopy. We're hearing the MJ comps. You grew up a Bulls fan. Do you see it? Or a better question is, who does Anthony Edwards remind you of?
he reminds me of '90s basketball. And I
Mm.
think that when you take a survey of just today's NBA, we are in the post Steph Warriors phenomenon that shaped the league from a 3 point perspective. But then you also look at the bubble where you saw the mid range game of Jimmy Butler and then him going to the finals with that. And then you look at the DeMar DeRozans and you look at the Jimmy Butlers. That makes you feel very 90s like. I think why Edwards gives people those Michael comparisons is because you're seeing a man's man, an alpha male, um, who's an a hole on the court. And I think that's a good thing for basketball. I don't think it's a bad thing in a world where everything is so PC. I feel that way about Draymond Green as well. I'm not comparing Draymond to Anthony Edwards, but I'm saying that type of play or that mentality that Draymond has is very Xavier McDaniel, very um, Charles Oakley, very Anthony Mason like, um, very, very just rugged. And Anthony Edwards gives you the Michael Kobe vibe because of the way he glides to the basket, outspoken, uh, can play both sides of the basketball, and is a natural leader because of his tenacity. So it's easy to make those Michael comparisons. I know there's the jokes about the looking alike and more, but I'm enjoying seeing it because it's something that I've seen before.
There's a lot of hype around the New York Knicks, and it's well deserved, Scoop B. It's well deserved. Um, Brunson, is it fair to say, especially with availability in consideration, that Brunson is the best basketball player in the East?
He's up there.
Yeah.
He's up there. I mean, you look at the Eastern Conference, Brunson is up there. Um, you give credit to Tatum. You give credit to um, Donovan Mitchell. You
Yep.
give credit to
Embiid, even though he was hurt.
yeah, you do.
Yeah, yeah.
You give credit to Joel Embiid. He's definitely up there. I've enjoyed just watching the basketball, whether it's the Knicks, whether it was the Orlando Magic, whether it was the Cavs or is the Cavs, whether it's the Celtics, whether it like I even in the playing tournament, I enjoy watching Kobe White put on
Yes.
for the Chicago Bulls. I enjoyed watching the Sixers make it a competitive series in round one against the Knicks. You know, I went to college in the Philly area, so for me, seeing both places where I spent significant time do well was definitely rewarding. And that's just the Eastern Conference. When you look at the West, I've enjoyed, Kyrie and Luca figuring it out. I enjoyed um, seeing the Lakers at least play basketball before, no, and that's no shade. I just enjoy good basketball if it's on. I'm gonna be honest with you, Milwaukee and Indiana was boring to me. I enjoy,
Okay.
I enjoyed Cleveland and Orlando a lot, if not New York and um, Philly in round one. But to specifically answer your question about the Knicks, I think they play competitive basketball. A, without Julius Randle present. B, with a supporting cast where in round one where Julius, or excuse me, in round one where Brunson wasn't always at his best. At times, McBride spelled him out in certain key points in games. OG Anunoby defensively has played well, particularly so far in round two. And Dante DiVincenzo has been really the catalyst for blue collar, hardworking basketball. And it's unfortunate that Mitchell Robinson will miss 6 to 8 weeks. But I think that's where you're going to see Hartenstein really have to step up in the interior, going against a Miles Turner who can get hot, and can match his level of hybrid. But I think Jalen Brunson has the ability to really play well because of a supporting cast, and it frees him up to just be him.
Is it important for the NBA, for the Knicks to be good, for the Lakers to be good, for the big markets to be good, or you think in the social media era it doesn't really matter as much?
for the money, it's important for those big cities to do well. I consider the teams like Philadelphia, the Knicks, the Lakers,
Yeah.
13 colonies of the NBA, if you will. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I definitely think that when you look at the history of the NBA, the Cleveland Cavaliers winning in 2016, they weren't a big market team. The Denver Nuggets last season, they weren't a big market team. The Toronto Raptors in 2019. But then you look at uh, what basketball looks like when the Bostons and the Knicks are in it. There's definitely a storied portion of it. It's very Disney-like for adults. But I also think that there's nothing wrong with small markets because they spend money too, whether in current NBA, whether that's Indiana, whether that's Cleveland, whether that is Orlando. I think in today's social media era, you don't have to be on Madison Avenue. You can make Madison Avenue come to you. LeBron James proved that.
Yeah.
Donovan Mitchell is benefiting from not having to be on that 2 Pennsylvania Plaza, at least currently. He's able to enjoy the fruits of his labor in a smaller market.
Speaking of small markets, OKC ended up number 1 in the West. And, you were an Orlando Magic fan growing up. They had 2 really young players lead them really far. Have you ever seen a team this young be this good?
Not since Orlando. Maybe Oklahoma when they went to the finals
Yeah.
against the Heat.
Even Orlando, like they had Horace Grant, right? They had Nick Anderson, right? They had Dennis Scott.
They did, and so
Yeah.
the only team that I can think of is the Oklahoma City Thunder that had James Harden, Kevin Durant,
Right.
and Russell Westbrook that went to the finals and did lose to the Miami Heat, and that's the only thing I can compare it to. And when I looked at that Oklahoma team, I spent significant time in Oklahoma, having done some business in Oklahoma City off and on the last few years, but just in kind of communicating with people in that area and just learning that makeup of that team. Back then when they went to the finals, they were just very young and they were um, able to enjoy the Miami nightlife maybe a little too much at that time, but they had a Kevin Durant and a Russell Westbrook and a James Harden that could run off of just competitive youth. And I think in this era of basketball with the Oklahoma City Thunder in the current iteration, they have a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander who has spent time in LA as a member of the Clippers and also under the tutelage of Chris Paul during his time in Oklahoma and spending time with guys like Lou Dort in Oklahoma. I learned how instrumental Russell was in that growth of that team. He and others that I've spoken to in that team speak reverently of how much Chris Paul being in that locker room and sharing experiences of their life really helped them. I think also their head coach, Coach Mark, definitely is very a taskmaster, but is a player's coach on a young team. And I think that bringing in Chet Holmgren has made all the difference in the world after sitting out all last season. This is a team that enjoys, being with each other, and they're basically in a college town. The only other major attraction is the Oklahoma Sooners, and the Thunder are really the talk of the town. And just learning their history and how they came about, and just even the shape of their stadium. Their stadium doesn't really accommodate. It's not shaped for a basketball team. Yet a basketball team plays there. It's more accommodating to a hockey team. Yet and still, Paycom Center is really a coming attraction. You've got guys that are playing drums in the arena while the game is going on. It's like a college pep band inside
Yeah.
the. It's really, you ever get a chance to go to Paycom, you'll enjoy it. It gives you very much college feel while you're
Yeah,
there.
it's interesting you say that because whenever I look this team, and I don't think I said this on the podcast or anything, like it feels like just a college basketball team that gets along really well together. And I'm not talking about, level of play. Obviously, they're a great NBA team, but just their camaraderie and the way they vibe and everything in that way.
Yeah, and they're really man amongst the people. That city is a good setup for them being both young and not having a lot of distractions. Like um, Oklahoma, to me, I get some of my best work done when I go to Oklahoma because I literally go to the arena, go to my hotel. I've been able to knock out multiple stories in like 3 4 days. Go get a good barbecue and a good night's sleep somewhere in between that. Oklahoma really is just they're able to just focus on basketball, go home. Their practice center is pretty dope. They really have just the world at their fingertips and being low key and in the cut at the same time.
So Darvin Ham was recently fired. I'm hearing Coach Ty Lue rumors. I don't know, like if I was Coach Ty, I would leave the Clippers because I feel like he has a great relationship with Bonner. Feel with I said with Bonner with Ballmer. It feels like his team. Uh, who do you think fits best as the next head coach for the Los Angeles Lakers?
I don't think Ty Lue fits with the Los Angeles Lakers, and I'm glad that I'm glad that the Dallas Mavericks gave Jason Kidd an extension because um, that situation is not conducive to long-term employment. And I think the Clippers gives Ty Lue a longer shelf life than coaching the Lakers. And I think that you're going to see the Clippers do the same thing that the Mavs uh, did with Jason Kidd and giving him a longer deal and his leverage. That happens in the NBA quite a bit. Um, for example, I don't know this to be true. I just, in my mind, it makes plausible sense. You look at um, Elton Brand, for example, who was mentioned in talks with the Charlotte Hornets as they were working in their front office, and he's currently under contract with the Sixers, and he got an extended deal because David Falk, who was his agent, uh, likely used that as leverage to get the Sixers to give him a longer deal. Comparatively, when you look at Ty Lue and Jason Kidd, that seemingly is what will and could happen for both those coaches. And so, you asked me who I think would be uh, a head coaching candidate for the Lakers. Um, I don't necessarily. I actually think the JJ Redick idea would work better in Charlotte for JJ than it would in Los Angeles. I think you need somebody that is attached to LeBron if LeBron decides to come back. But I think ultimately, Darvin Ham, one, did not deserve to be fired. And a lot of it
I
came
agree.
from complaints that were coming from both LeBron as well as Rich Paul behind the scenes, from what I've been told, to both Linda Rambis as well as JD Buss. And ultimately, I'm told that they conceded based upon that. I think in a situation like this, you have to build with somebody, and the person that I thought should be the head coach was on the assistant coaching staff and was fired. I thought that Phil Handy would have been a good fit. And so, in answer to your question, the short end of that answer is I don't know. But I don't think Tyler and Jason Kidd or JJ Redick would necessarily be the best fit. JJ Redick, if he was hired, would be a candidate because that's LeBron's guy, and the Lakers want to do whatever they can to make LeBron happy.
Yeah. Speaking of LA, the other LA team, the LA Clippers, it felt like this year to me was their last hope. Where do they go from here? They're going into the new building. I'm sure they're gonna want all their stars back, but where do you think they go from here?
Um, well, I think it starts with what they're going to do with Paul George,
Mm-hmm.
whether they are going to give him what he asked for, or they're going to go out and get somebody else. But I think if they let Paul George walk, uh, getting another star next to Kawhi is going to be interesting, and also whether they're going to be able to pay Terrence Mann and Russell Westbrook to stay. Those are going to be the three dominoes that I think will happen in that order.
Yep. Scooby, we talked NBA. I want to talk a little bit about you. You started interviewing NBA guys at the age of 12.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what did success look like to you at 12, looking into the future, and have you reached that?
Success to me was being happy and being around basketball, and making money off my name and living within my purpose. I think being young and being around Michael, Dennis, Scotty, Patrick Ewing, Tim Duncan in his rookie year, first couple years in the league, being around Allen Iverson at that point, Charles Barkley towards the end, Kobe as he and Shaq as they were, progressing. I think that was cool because you were the coolest kid in school. But I think when I looked around and I saw some of my peers then who were Stephen A. Smith, who was at the Philadelphia Inquirer, Woj, who was at the Bergen Record at the time, Chris Broussard, who was at the New York Times. In my mind, I think as a kid, I knew if I stuck with it, good things would happen. But I don't think I necessarily thought that I arrived because I knew I still had to be a kid and I needed to go to school. I'm glad that I had the opportunity to be a kid. Most people who get in those situations, they're in a fishbowl and they don't necessarily get the chance to go back to just being a kid. Not to compare the two, but you've seen the documentary that was out recently about the Nickelodeon kids and all the stuff that was going on there. No comparison there, but the point I'm making is, as I was watching that, I was thinking about how some of those kids who were in the Nickelodeon documentary, they weren't able to just go to college and just be normal kids. They went from being a kid prodigy or a kid star to being an adult and didn't have that time to just be young and have fun and make mistakes because you're going to make those mistakes along the way. And I think I was able to do that, going to prep school and then going to undergrad and then going to grad school and just growing and even making mistakes once you get out of school. You're going to constantly make mistakes. It's how you rebound and you make those things happen. Um, and I guess your other question was just as far as did I reach that? No, I still have work to do. I think I'm in a good space. I think sometimes when you have certain access or your access that you have, people think certain things or that you've arrived. I still have some ways to go, but I'm well on my way.
It feels like though that humans are built in a way, no matter what success they reach, the bar always raises in their own head.
That's true. I wasn't who I was 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. What advice would you give your 12-year-old self starting in the industry, knowing what you know now?
Just continue to be yourself. Um, and I just because a bunch of people do it one way doesn't mean that's the only way. And to follow what you know, and just be yourself, and don't be afraid to be yourself. I I even as confident as I am, sometimes you question just your moves or your connectivity like to that. Like a boxer could throw a punch, but how much was that a wasted punch versus even though it connected and weakened your opponent versus a punch that just like the highlight of
Mm,
so it's like I think that kind of dives into just being efficient, working smarter, and just and don't be afraid of ownership. If you tell them networks mean something, but ownership and legacy mean more.
yeah. Yeah. And I think everybody wants to expedite the process, but patience is so important as well.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. How has the industry changed in terms of podcasting? Because I mean, your podcast started in a very interesting way. You transcribed the audio to digital from the interviews you did in the past. I always talk about how much video is important now in the podcast game, right? Because everybody thinks of a lot of people when they think about podcasts, they think about video these days, and it wasn't like that about even 5, 10 years ago. What are your thoughts on the evolution of podcasting?
I had a conversation. I had a business meeting last night, and this particular company that I met with, the person who is the point of contact at this company was working with a talent of someone that I interviewed a while back.
Mm,
Uh, I was when I was doing a show at a network, and this was in 2015, and they said to me, um, "You were ahead of the curve in 2015 of podcasting and branding and making things stick, both visually through audio, through text, and more." And they said to me, now everybody's doing that. And they said, credit to you. But I think the thing that I was not consistent with back then was video. To your point where you talked about you feel like video is such a big portion of it. Um, I think that video is important, but I also think the spoken word, the quote, is still matters because if YouTube were to die today, um, search engines still matter where you're going to find that text. So I think as much as people want to get the aesthetic off on video, the audio portion and the text version still matter. In a
100%.
world, everybody has a podcast. And I feel like it's going to be a shift with that where, okay, everybody who has the people who have a podcast who are good, like we're at a point now where there's comparatively where you've got a lot of artists 20 years ago who were on American Idol who were on MySpace. They took MySpace, went to American Idol, and took American Idol and flipped it into a professional career that took you into singing, acting, and more. And I feel like we're in a space similarly 20 years later where in the podcast game, that's cool, but does the podcast game transition you into a lucrative deal with a podcast company? What does that transition you into a writing gig? Does that transition you to the streaming services and the next TV deals that are coming up into play with the NBA and the streaming and all that other stuff? Like you shouldn't. I mean, I would imagine like if you're trying to move up, some people may want to have a podcast, and I want to give respect and credit to that. But if there are people who are looking to make the next jump, what's that American Idol moment via MySpace that transitions you? And once you get to that American Idol moment, if you want to take a step further, how do you take that and transcend it into the acting and the singing if that's what you want? I think there's a lot of people making noise and a lot of people in a traffic jam trying to go through the Lincoln Tunnel. But how do you get into the city?
So you're basically, yeah, you're basically saying that everybody's doing video at this point, and some people are it's interesting because some people will call what they're doing a podcast, but only put it on YouTube, and they won't even have an audio feed.
Yeah, I mean, and I do both. Some stuff I put on YouTube that's
yeah.
podcast. Some stuff I put on a podcast that's not on YouTube. It's using multiple platforms to get from point A to point B, and it's like you might be in a situation where you might put one thing on YouTube that you don't put on TikTok. You might put one thing on Apple or Spotify that you may not just put on your Facebook page for advertisement. It's just knowing what each platform does and the reason why. It's not just to be famous to be seen. It's to move from point A to point B. It's what are you using the pivot foot or the euro for? Is it just to get the applause or is it to get the 2 points?
Facts. Scoopy. Great stuff. You know, you're always welcome back on the show. Where can we find you? Speaking of all the platforms, where can we find you, man?
Follow me on Twitter at ScoopB. Visit ScoopB.com. Follow me on Instagram at ScoopB. Subscribe to the ScoopB Radio podcast on all streaming platforms. And that's it. That's where you can find me. ScoopB.com, Twitter and Instagram at ScoopB. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, ScoopB TV. That's where you can find me and all that I have going on.
Scoop, you're always welcome back on the show. Talk soon.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.